Okay, the amateur DMR network. We have over 1,200 registered repeaters around the world. There's close to 15,000 registered radios. Now that doesn't mean users, that means registered radios. The number is a little bit less than that when you count users only. And the networks are basically divided into two infrastructures. One is Mototrbo, which is the Motorola Solutions product, which is probably about 95% of the repeaters. And the other is Hytera. They both basically do the same thing, except the two networks are not currently interconnected. I'm going to speak mainly about the Mototrbo side because I'm not that familiar with Hytera, okay? DMR-Mark, Digital Mobile Radio Motorola Amateur Radio Club, really not. It's more of a loose association of individuals, some who used to work at Motorola, some who do work at Motorola, and some who never worked at Motorola, who wanted to implement this DMR technology on the amateur networks. DMR-Mark handles the registration of radios and repeaters no matter what network they're on. So if you buy yourself a new radio, you need to go to their website and get registered. There's some other large groups that service the United States. One is DCI, Digital Communication Interconnection, which is turbo.org. And then we have the DMR North America Talk Group Server Project. And there's other groups in Canada, in England, in Germany, the rest of the world, okay? We also have regional groups. Just sounds like the organization structure of most, smaller clubs. We have state groups, we have regional groups that cover multiple states who build networks, and then the networks are interconnected with other networks. What this Mototrbo network really is a network of networks. Sounds like the Internet of Everything, in case you've heard that term. The network is made up of basically 3 tiers or 3 levels in the model of the network. Down at the bottom we have the individual repeaters. How many people here have a repeater? Okay. If they're connected to a network, they're somehow connected to an access bridge. Some of the common bridges used are C-Bridge from Rayfield Communications and TLNet from Bridgecom. By the way, both products are exactly the same. They're made by an organization called RavenNet. The access bridges, where the repeaters connect into, then are connected into other access bridges they have interconnects with, and also to what we call the core bridges. DMR-Mark runs 2 core bridges, CC1 and CC2. The purpose of running 2 of them is if one fails, all the access bridges switch over to the other one. So we have redundancy.
So what is DMR? DMR, like a lot of these other ones, is a published standard. Doesn't mean that it's fully open source or anything. I know there's some amateur stuff that is fully open source. The chip that's in every radio is proprietary, just like every other digital mode that's commercial, I should say. P25, D-Star, Fusion, all those are the same way. But this is a standard. The main benefit of DMR is it's not just one manufacturer. I know D-Star has a lot of benefits to amateur radio. However, there's only one manufacturer right now that really makes them. There's over half a dozen, and I think it's closer to 10 or 11 right now of these DMR radios. Some of the older digital modes, the voice is a little shady sometimes. I think the voice quality is much better on these newer ones. The battery life is much improved. If you're not scanning, I will tell you, will slow your battery life quite a bit. The biggest benefit to DMR, and really the thing that sets it apart to me, is the multiple talk paths on one frequency. So that means you can have one repeater, and we'll give a demo here in a minute, and there's actually two people can transmit to the repeater at the same time and have two different conversations that are completely independent of each other. They won't interfere with each other, they don't hear each other. That's the real benefit. So I'll get to that a little more in a minute. Data applications, you can text message, you can send commands to different things. Not a whole lot of amateur application there, but it's something fun to play with. Excuse me. And most of the radios are commercial grade radio, which I know the amateur radios are getting better, but usually means it's it's good performance radio. A lot of people say it's a bad thing because they're only UHF or only VHF, but that does help with the interference that you may get on the radios, so it makes the filtering much better. So as I said, this is really two repeaters in one. Usually you have, if you wanted to do this on analog or any other digital, you have to have actually two different repeaters. You have some combining equipment and you can share an antenna. And you have one frequency here and another frequency and you have your two radio groups. With DMR, it's TDMA, it's time division multiple access. So you have one repeater, one antenna, no combining equipment, and every 30 milliseconds it swaps back and forth on what person is talking. So you remember your old AT&T phones when you get close to the speaker and you kind of hear it chattering? That's TDMA. These radios will do the same thing if you get close to a speaker. You can kind of hear it chattering. So that's what's remarkable to me. These radios, I actually key up, talk for 30 milliseconds, dekey, listen for 30 milliseconds, key back up, listen or talk for 30 milliseconds and back and forth. And what's really neat about that is you can receive signaling while you're talking. So somebody, if say you have somebody interfering maliciously with your repeater, you can actually dekey their radio while they're keyed up.
North America Talk Group Server project also has a primary and secondary bridge for redundancy. And then DCI has a single bridge. And in North America, that accounts for most of the larger talk groups. A lot of the regional and state talk groups are hosted out of access bridges. And so when somebody on repeater 1 wants to talk to somebody on repeater 6, the traffic from repeater 1 goes to their access bridge, goes up to one of the DMR mark access bridges if it's on North America talk group, and goes over to another access bridge, and they get interconnected. DMR was developed by the European Telecommunication Standards Institute, ETSI, and it is the worldwide standard for professional mobile radio. It's not an amateur standard, okay? It was designed for commercial, business, government. And we divide DMR into what we call 3 tiers.
Talking about bandwidth, you hear a lot of digital modes, they talk about how small the bandwidth is. Traditional 25K is the analog. The DMR is 12.5K, which is kind of the commercial standard right now. Like I said, the benefit is you actually are 2, so you're kind of sort of getting 6.25K. And some of the other digital modes like D-Star say, well, there's 6.25K, but if you really wanted to have 2 different people talking at the same time, there's still a guard band in there, and so you're really using a little bit closer to that 25K. We don't have a guard band because we're all on one frequency. So digital, for those that have never used digital, you probably didn't have a really great audio example here, but there's no hiss, there's no popping, there's no static. It's kind of like a cell phone. You're either there or you're not. You can have 0 on the signal meter, and the radio can still hear somebody talking. It sounds like they're right next door to you. It doesn't sound any better if you're right next to the repeater or 30 miles away from the repeater. The newer stuff, like this DMR, I think has a lot better range than the older technologies. It seems like the older ones, as that signal strength started going away, you started getting a little errors, and like on D-Star, the popular term is R2D2. Oh, you went R2D2 on me. It happens. I don't get that quite as much on DMR. The error correction seems to be quite a bit better. Part of that, I think, is because of that bandwidth that you get.
In order to digitize the voice, we use what are called vocoders. DMR currently uses the DSVI AMBE+2 vocoder by agreement of the manufacturers. it is not specified in the ESTI standards. Basically what happened, Motorola picked the ANBE plus 2 and everybody else just followed along, so their radios would be compatible. One of the features of the AMBER plus 2 is that it has forward error correction, which means that bit errors in transmission can be corrected, which is an improvement over the older vocoders, such as used in D-Star. DMR 2-slot TDMA, said before, occupies 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth with a spatial efficiency of 6.25 kilohertz. 6.25 kilohertz is only using about 25% of the bandwidth that we see on the typical analog FM system. We have 2 time slots. So it's one frequency. With TDMA, we have 2 time slots, time slot 1 and time slot 2. And the radios are designed to pick out which time slot you're on so that you listen to the correct time slot and receive. For the repeater operator, it's more cost efficient per talk channel. Typically, across the amateur DMR network, and I say typically, it doesn't mean everybody complies because each little network goes out and does whatever they want. We typically see the wide area talk groups on one time slot and the more local talk groups on another time slot.
With the 2 slots, you can also do data and voice at the same time. So say you could have voice going in on one slot, and you could reserve slot 2 for data if you wanted. That's not necessarily how we have our stuff set up, but it is a potential way to do it. If you do not network your repeaters, it also has another function that you can do dynamic mixed mode. So whatever goes in is what comes out. So if somebody wants to use that as an analog repeater, they can go in, the repeater says, hey, there's somebody talking, they're an analog, I'm going to output analog. And it'll do a PL tone, everything just like a regular analog repeater. And then if somebody comes in on digital, either slot 1, slot 2, it'll go through the repeater and back out the same. Like I said, all of our repeaters in Oklahoma are on the network, so we do not support this. If you turn on the network, that option goes away. But for any club, I know the Yaesu Fusion repeaters are quite the hot topic now because of their price, and they are also mixed mode, so it's very similar to that. These are more expensive than the Fusions, and if you network them, you lose that capability. So